I remember spending a lot of time looking out this window. I would look out on the river from my bedroom and dream dreams. They were dreams about making life fairer.
There comes a time where an individual has to take a stand and be prepared to pay a price for taking that stand.
The Emerald Isle has its first woman president.
The women of Ireland who, instead of rocking the cradle, rocked the system.
Decided to name Mrs. Mary Robinson High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Mary Robinson, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I watched the documentary last night, and I have to say, for the first few minutes, I was laughing out loud for some of the instances of it, because it showed a side to you I wasn't really experiencing. Apparently, you're great crack. You party as much as you work. And I particularly loved the moment when you spoke about holding your grandson Rory in your arms and how it changed something in you. Can you bring us back to that moment?
Yes, I remember it very vividly, because obviously he was the first grandchild. And somehow I had this reaction. I had been talking about 2050, and I said, he'll be 47 in 2050. He'll have his whole life ahead of him. That's what I was thinking. And therefore, it kind of motivated me to think, I must do more for all of those who are being born and going to be living through this century in a way I won't be, because we have a climate and nature crisis, which is very serious. But on the other hand, we have a possibility of a much better world, a world of renewable energy, much healthier, much fairer, etc. So we must be positive and work towards that world. But he, very much inspired me to think in a future way that I wasn't thinking as much.
I suppose you've lived through many of the positives in our society, particularly when it comes to the advancement of women and equality. It's when I talk to people younger than me now, it's hard for them to imagine things like homosexuality were illegal. Even things like the women in the home, you weren't allowed work, the marriage ban. It's absolutely astounding. So do you think, looking back in the bad old days of John Charles McQuaid and the theocracy that we did have, that going forward we can wrench ourselves back from the negativity that's so profound at the moment?
Well, I think the film is important in showing the progress that was made, especially in this country. I didn't particularly want to make it, but Bride Rosny, my dear friend, persuaded me, and of course it's dedicated to her. But I think it does illustrate, the kind of progress that we have made. But we should also know, and that's why I think Aoife, the director, was absolutely right to also cover a bit of the United States, where it's going backwards for women in many states in the United States under bad leadership. So you can't guarantee that things will remain forward. You've got to be constantly vigilant to make sure that we do hold on. And then you mentioned the attacks on women in public life, which are disproportionate to attacks on male politicians, for example. We have to somehow get hold of that and put in the right controls so it doesn't continue to be a problem for women, because we need more women in public life. We need more young people willing to, be engaged and get involved. Yeah.
You were never afraid, actually, to say what you felt and feck the diplomacy. Excuse my terminology there. But you had to tell some very harsh truths to people who normally they wouldn't have done it. Someone else in your position would have been more reticent, I think. So, but there were consequences to that along the way as well. Is there any regrets that you have looking back on actions you've done that you would have done differently?
Well, I know that because I was very outspoken as High Commissioner for Human Rights, that the United States, for example, didn't want me to continue because I was critical of the Bush administration and what they had done post 9/11. But it was important to do the job, not to keep the job, as I said. And I was happy to move on to a different way of dealing with human rights and now doing it through climate justice.
Yeah, climate justice as well. I mean, when you see a lot of very powerful people in the world denying that climate change exists, they're not listening to scientists, they're playing to the populist opinion of so many people who are getting their information from social media. They're not getting it from verified sources. They're not listening to both sides. It's almost like the propaganda machine of Nazi Germany is in full force, but in a different medium now. How can you convince people like that who won't listen.
I think that's a very important point, because we're actually seeing worse now. We're seeing that it's driving people, the algorithms are driving people to the kind of dark side and to become more violent. We're seeing it in the United Kingdom and in Belfast in recent times, being affected by these algorithms of social media. We need to get on top of that. We need to realise and stop having hate speech on platforms for far too long, etc. And we need more controls. We have to have regulations by governments that hold social media to account. We need freedom of expression, of course. As a human rights person, I believe in that. But when you're in a theatre, you don't shout fire. I mean, that was the old story of what you don't do. These algorithms are shouting fire, go get out into the street and throw rocks, and it's really very serious because we need rule of law. We need a civilised society so that we can all prosper, and we mustn't let that be undermined by anonymous, unaccountable voices getting in people's ear, and, as I say, driving them to be more angry, and then more frustrated, and then more violent.
And it's quite sad when you see that happening to a place like Ireland. I suppose traditionally we would have liked to have thought we're very welcoming, we're very loving, we're very open people, with the diaspora is absolutely enormous throughout the world. What would you say to Irish people now who are feeling quite threatened, and they're acting out against refugees coming to this country on a massive level?
Yeah,
all
I think
around
we
the
need
country?
to talk a lot more about what it is to be a migrant, to remember our history, to remember our famine and the dispersal of our people, to remember how we've gathered that in now with the Irish diaspora, and we're connected in a way we weren't before that light in the window helped to shape that Irish diaspora. But we also have to know that it's migrants who are the bravest of the brave. They've left their country to try and make a new life and then send money back to help those left at home. That's what migrants do. They send a whole lot of money back home to those at home because they've had some opportunity. We should embrace the fact that, this is part of humanity, it's part of living, and actually it's going to be worsened by this climate and nature crisis. It drives people on top of conflict, and we've too many conflicts in our world. So we need young people to be inspired, to get active and to believe in our core values, which are still the same values of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we have to live in accordance to those values, and we'll have a better world.
A female daughter of migrants, of course, that could possibly be the next president in the States, so that could maybe be a good thing.
Yes, I'm very much hoping that Kamala Harris will be the next president, because it's so important not just to have a woman president, but to have not to have, again, a very bad president who did so much harm and who would do even more harm, probably, if he got the opportunity.
Mary Robinson, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Pleasure, thank you. I suppose I would like to be remembered as somebody who saw the need for change during her life and tried to make as much change as possible.